an hour flight or a 45-minute drive. In my imagination, you're waiting, lying on your side, with your hands between your thighs.
KCYP 97.7 FM, The City. We have a great interview today. But first of all, I want to invite and I want to welcome everyone that's watching us through Facebook Live. I want to welcome everyone that's watching us through YouTube Live. And I want to also welcome all of our radio listeners through 97.7 FM, the frequency, as well as through the city977.com or on our TuneIn radio app, the City 977. So we've got multiple ways of streaming. We've got a lot of audience that is able to capture our signal throughout the world. And so we want to welcome all of you guys. Today we have a really special interview because we've, as you know, we utilize this radio station as a tool for to educate. We promote a lot of the arts, a lot of the music in the area. But this time we have a gentleman in the studio whom we've never had. We've never had a person that in this particular field. And so I'm really excited to bring him in. I want to welcome Daniel Case. He is a missionary. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Now, we've never had a missionary in our studios today, and this is a field. This is a ministry that's really close to my heart because when I was growing up in Dallas, my folks were fortunate enough to be able to do some missionary work in New Mexico, and so I hold missionary work really close to my heart. And so, thank you for coming out. And I know that I want you to tell us a little bit about your life because, folks, it's very interesting. I was speaking with him earlier, and he's got a lot of really, really important information to share with us. And I want you to just sit back, relax, and enjoy this interview. Now, we might have to cut this into two parts. I don't know how you feel about coming back in the future because
Sure.
There's a lot of really interesting information that he's got. But I want to rewind back to your childhood. He was sharing with me that he grew up in Cuba. So we want to start from there, sir.
Sure. Well, great. Well, my first memories are from Cuba, and I went there as a kid. I was just 2 years old when my parents went as missionaries to Cuba. And so we lived near Havana. And so my first memories are all about the tropical island and learning how to swim in the ocean behind a huge coral reef. So it's like a large swimming pool. And basically being able to go around in shorts and a t-shirt year round. So it was a fun time, and learning Spanish and English at the same time. So if you listen to me and my brothers and sisters, we would talk a mix of English and Spanish. And if my parents weren't around, it was mostly Spanish. So, and of course, Cuban Spanish is a little different than what you hear around here. And so one of the fun things is that each country in Latin America has slang. It has different words for different things. And one of the fun ones in Cuba was for the bus. The bus is called a wawa. And so when I got to Mexico and asked where the wawa stopped, everybody looked at me and said, well, we don't know what a wawa is. So anyway, but it was just a really good experience growing up there. And then, of course, back in 1953, when I was just about 5 years old, the revolution started, and it was short-lived in '53. But then, of 1956, it started up again, and where the the people who were in charge of it, Fidel Castro and all his people, sailed from Mexico all the way to the southeastern part of Cuba, and landed there and started their march towards the capital, which was the other direction, all the way to the west. And little by little, they conquered territory, and basically they had to recruit people along the way, because they only landed with a very few people from Mexico, and most of them were killed as they landed. And so there was a feeling of things going south, things not going well, and through those years. And my dad, who was a veteran of World War II, he had to teach us kids how to bite the dust if we heard gunfire, which happened once right near our home. And there was a Sunday, I still remember, Sunday afternoon, and we still had our Sunday clothes on, and I had to dive into the dirt on the street. It got all dirty, but fortunately nothing happened to us. But I know for a fact that it was a very stressful time for my parents. You know, when you're a kid, you don't really think too much about what could be happening around you, but I was happy if I was on my bicycle or skating or whatever, and hiking around or flying my kite. That's a big sport in Cuba back then. And yeah, it was a stressful time. And then January 1st of '59, the whole thing changed, and the rebels took over the island, and the dictator left, and things started changing, and things that we kind of thought would be better actually got worse. But that's the way those promises go, right? For a new regime to get some kind of traction with the people, they have to promise a lot of things, and which is what happens. And as we found out later, that that's all they were, was promises, and little by little freedoms were taken away, and made it much more difficult to travel, to do purchasing. Everything was being watched, and currency started to change, and they had control of all the currency, that sort of thing. So it kind of got difficult. And I still remember July 4th, 1960. We went to the beach with a couple other missionary families, and I noticed that the adults were sitting in the shade talking, not in the water, and which was my favorite place. But I was curious of what was going on. I was 12 years old, just a few weeks from turning 13, and I sidled up to listen, and I heard the parents asking each other what they were going to do. And first time in my life, I heard an adult say, "I don't know." And that kind of freaked me out. I didn't think adults knew how to say that. I thought that was a kid thing, But yeah, that was really a big experience. And sure enough, there's some things that happened, announcements that were made on the radio, and my dad went to the embassy to find out what was going on, and they told him that they couldn't say anything. And he said, "Well, look, I have a wife and 5 children here. I really need some help here." And they said, "Our hands are tied. We can't say anything." And so he went from there to the dock and bought tickets. And it turned out we were on the last ship out, just 3 weeks later.
The last ship out of Cuba.
Out of Cuba, the last commercial ship. Yeah. So that was it. Everybody else, the next day, everybody else had to fly out, and we're able to take just one suitcase each. and $10. That was the limit.
Wow, you were sharing with me that it was like at the scene out of The Sound of Music, where
Right.
y'all had to sneak out in the middle of the night,
Yeah,
push the
we
car
we
out.
packed all night. And at 4 in the morning, we turned off all the lights and opened the garage doors and pushed the car out. And we had a station wagon, 1953 Chevy station wagon. So it was so full of stuff that my little brother and I sat on the tailgate, and the rest of the family sat in the front seat for the 2-hour drive to Havana. And it was a full moon, so we were able to roll out of town with no motor, no lights until we got out. And my dad turned the engine on, and we made it through the countryside. There was about 40 kilometers, little teeny roads, and we had one guard station to go by, which we were kind of worried about. But when we went by, they were asleep. So we got all the way to the ship and drove on the ship, and we were on our way. That was a very loaded ship that day. Lots of people got the memo, I think.
You were telling me that there was a famous author on the
That's
ship.
right. Yeah. Of all things, on the same ship was Ernest Hemingway. And my mom pointed him out to us. Of course, I had no idea who that was, but she was quite impressed that he was leaving at the same time. And he was a great friend of Fidel Castro, drinking buddy, but he left also. Things got really bad about that time.
And that's when you landed in Key West, correct?
Right. We landed in Key West. The ship made a 10-hour trip to go 90 miles, so, as you can imagine. It was pretty exciting as we got close to Key West. A huge submarine came up next to us and escorted us the rest of the way, which was pretty exciting for me as a kid.
Wow, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
And my hats off and my prayers go out to all of the missionaries, because um, I'm afraid that missionaries go through similar situations all around the world.
Oh,
And
yeah.
especially with what's going on right now in the Middle East.
Exactly.
I'm sure there are missionaries out there right now who might be even trying to get out.
Exactly.
And so our prayers go
No
out
doubt about it.
our prayers go out to all the families. And it's a big sacrifice that is being done, because it's a whole family. You're not only calling to the ministry, but your wife has to be called into the ministry. Your kids are called into the ministry. It's a whole family ministry.
It's a family affair. Yes,
Yes,
for sure.
That's we need to cover our missionaries with prayers and support, spiritual support, financial support. We need to cover them, where they're at, wherever they're at
That's
around
right.
the world.
That's
So
it.
and so now, please now fast forward to your work in Mexico with a very unique people that you have worked with, and tell me about your work in the translation of the word.
Right. Well, it's a really fun part of our lives. My wife and I were both children of missionaries, and she grew up in Mexico. In fact, she was born in Mexico, and her parents from the States, and her parents translated the New Testament into the Zapotec language. And if our hearers know anything about the history of Mexico, one of the most famous presidents, Benito Juarez, was a Zapotec, and he spoke this dialect that my in-laws translated the New Testament for, and it was a really significant translation. It put into writing form a language that had only been an oral tradition, and as if you study much about the indigenous world in Mexico, especially, most of the languages of the world are oral tradition. They're not written languages, and so there's a really like a handful, that are comparatively that are written languages, and that have any kind of accumulation of literature. So these languages in Mexico, there's 150 languages, and in Oaxaca, there's 75 of those, which is about half. And There's Zapotecs and Mixtecs and Mijes uh, and a variety of other Huave, and then each of those have subdialects. So, like for Zapotec, it has 40 different dialects from the mountains all the way down to the isthmus, and it changes so much they don't really understand each other, even though the root is Zapotec, for instance. And the group that we work with is called Chitino, and their language, same thing. It was never written before, and even though it's a very extensive language, they can express lots and lots of things, um, but it had never been written. And so that was our first task, was to figure out a way of illustrating it on paper with that, and that it wouldn't be so different with characters than the national language, which is Spanish. And so that was our first task, to come up with an alphabet. And of course, some sounds are the same as Spanish, but a lot of them aren't. And so we had to work with that. And this, the main thing that we have noticed, and I guess really wanted to emphasize, is when you arrive in a place like this, which had never seen white people before, and they had memories of the Spanish arriving, and they had bad words for those people, especially if they had beards, because the folks there, because of their Oriental background, they can't grow a beard, or if they have some intermixing, they get a few hairs on their chin, but that's about it. And so I never wore a beard, for instance, because I didn't want to be categorized by that. But they had a word for those who are not from there, and they say "tsonta," which means a person from behind the ocean. And so they would call me that, and I said, "Well, no, I'm just from." I was born in California, just up the way here. But that didn't convince them very much, because we just look so different. In fact, people would say, "Well, when you see me, do you see everything all green?" And because they don't have a word for blue, so my eyes are blue, and so they thought that I saw everything green. Wow. And so I kind of kidded them. I said, "Well, so you see everything black?" so we had some fun with that, but we were just a curiosity. In fact, we were better than TV. I mean. So we had people looking in our windows all the time, because it's such a curiosity. And of course, we had our oldest daughter was a little blondie, and they just were so perplexed to see a child with blonde hair. And the only thing we had in common with the folks was that we had children, and but they would ask us, "Why did you paint your daughter's hair that color?" And because it reminded them of the corn silk, and they all plant corn, and they all see the color of corn silk, and so they thought that was the closest thing they could come up with of why our hair was that color. And my hair was that color, my wife's hair is that color, but they had to talk about our children that way. It was a lot of fun. Just but the main thing that we saw was, in the underlying, was this fear of outsiders, fear of anything new, fear of the elements. When there was thunder and lightning, there was a lot of fear. They didn't know what was going to happen. It was also fear of eclipses, and they didn't know you could predict when the eclipse was going to happen and what that was. I remember explaining with a tennis ball and a flashlight, and a basketball about an eclipse. And I was telling this gentleman how the eclipse happens. And when I finished, which was very difficult, and in the language and everything, and he looked at me and says, "You're lying." It just sounded so ridiculous. And anyway, I could understand. I mean, you know, you talk about celestial bodies, and the only thing you know is the ridges and mountains around you, and you've never been anywhere else. You know, you have to wonder, you know, what the universe is really like, and it's our education. And I've said this many times. If you have a C average in high school, you know more than about half of the world. You know, because there's just so much that you're exposed to in high school here, and really most of the world doesn't even know those things. You know, now that was back before internet, so you know there's lots of kids who are getting exposed to stuff even in remote areas that they had no hope of ever seeing before. So,
Wow.
but yeah, that was the main, you know, the beginnings, and what we started running into was vocabulary problems to express certain things that are in the Bible, and one of the things that you really have to get a handle on right away is the type of love that God is talking about. And as you know, in our language, you know, if you say I love Chick-fil-A, well, you know, that's not really the same as, you know, God loves you. So how do you distinguish those things? And the same thing in most languages, you know, you have to distinguish between liking somebody, loving a spouse, for instance, and or loving your children, and then the Bible is really clear that love of God is so much greater, and there's an element of sacrifice involved, which is if you look at John chapter 3 verse 16, it talks about God giving his son as a sacrifice for us, and that idea is really foreign to a lot of cultures, and so when we started looking for that idea, we couldn't find it. Sacrificial love, and it took us 20 years to find it. And then at one point, as a long story short, someone was in the hospital. We were helping with that situation, and that person was so overwhelmed that we would be helpful. And they said to us, "Well, you're like a mother hen to us." And we had never heard that expression before. But it turns out in the culture, everybody knows that a mother hen will give her life for her chicks if the chicks are threatened by fire or by an eagle or some other or hawk. She'll gather them and then she'll die, but nothing happens to the chicks. Even fire can go right over and the mother will die, but the chicks are saved.
Wow.
And so that's a well-known aspect of animal life to the Indian people. I didn't know that. I wasn't raised on a farm, so you know, I didn't know those kind of things.
Well, and I'm sorry to interrupt. That
Sure.
is an excellent analogy, and we've unfortunately run out of time. But I want to invite you back to part 2 because there's a lot more information that we want to talk about.
Sure.
And if you're just joining us, we're speaking with missionary Daniel Case, and he took us through his life growing up in Cuba and escaping. At the last minute, and then he brought us into his when he began working with the Chatino people in Mexico,
Mm-hmm.
and I want he's going to come back, and in part 2 he's going to tell us about the influences of Chinese in the Chatino people, and he's going to
Mm-hmm.
tell us a little bit more about his translation of the word, translating the Bible into the Chatino language. And so we want to thank you very much for making the time to come out here.
Thank you.
We invite you again to come
It's
back.
an honor to be here.
Thank you so much. We
Okay.
invite you. It's an honor to have you in our studio. It really is. And so it's I want to invite you next week for part 2 of the talk with Daniel Case, missionary Daniel Case. And so thank you for coming, and we'll see you here again next
Okay.
week.
All right.
Thank you
Thank you,
guys.
Joe.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Stay tuned. We have another show coming right up at 5:30, and then of course next week we're going to continue the conversation with missionary Daniel Case. Very interesting stuff. All right. God bless everyone. Pray for our brothers and sisters all around the world, all our missionary brothers and sisters all around the world who really need your prayers right now. Keep listening to 97.7 FM, The City.
You're gonna drown. Oh, and I know you want it. I know you want it. Oh, tonight I need it. But I'm gonna let you down. Don't wanna hurt you. Just like I did before.